I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Jordan Bateman, the BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Welcome back to the show, Jordan.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
You were just mentioning a speech that you gave to some big wigs. Tell us who you were talking to and what was your message?
Yeah, I was invited by the Mortgage Investment Association of British Columbia. They're about to celebrate their 100th anniversary, and essentially they work with brokers and lawyers and investors, people, developers, people who are in the mortgage industry to talk about issues facing housing and mortgages and lending and whatnot. So they invited me to come talk to them about housing taxes, and was really grateful to them for the opportunity, and got to talk about what I think is probably the Lower Mainland's second favorite subject behind the weather.
And that would be real estate, real estate, real estate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, it's almost a universal language in the Lower Mainland, right? Like you can go anywhere and talk to any stranger, loved one, whatever, bring up real estate, and everyone has an opinion and something to say. And, absolutely fueled by the media. In the past 2 years, you'd be hard-pressed to find a copy of a newspaper that did not include some type of real estate story. And there have been a lot of very good reporters who have made their bones over the last couple of years breaking different real estate scandals and other stories that definitely have gotten people talking and thinking about this industry in a new way.
Jordan, you're very disturbed because politicians seem to have only one solution to any problem, and that's to slap more taxes on it.
I am disturbed by this. So, right now in the city of Vancouver, to build a new home, you're subject to 107 fees, taxes, levies, government regulations, 107 separate costs put on you by government. And yet, this summer, in the face of a massive housing affordability crisis, we've had talk of 108th, which is the foreign home buyer tax, 109th tax, which is the tax on Airbnb, 110th tax, the vacant home tax, and now a 111th tax, the TransLink development cost charge. I just marvel at the idea that these guys think they can tax us towards affordability when everyone knows that imposing more cost on something does nothing except drive up the price.
What's the politicians' excuse for, as you said, 111 new fees and taxes on Vancouver homeowners?
Well, do you remember that moment in the U.S. election debate, and Mrs. Clinton was asked about her email scandal, WikiLeaks, and she immediately pivoted to talk about Russia and Putin, and it was so bald-faced a pivot that even Donald Trump, who's hardly aware of what's going on around him, said, "Wow, that was quite the pivot." This is the problem. Our politicians, if you ask them about their role in the housing affordability crisis, immediately pivot to blame everyone else. They blame foreign investors. They might blame Ottawa for not having a national housing strategy. Definitely blame the provincial government for not having giving them enough money for affordable housing. They'll blame baby boomers who are holding on to properties too long, who have the gall to actually want to live in their home. They'll blame developers for trying to gouge people. They'll blame the media for hyping things. I mean, they just blame everyone they can possibly think of rather than looking in the mirror. And part of our job, I think, as taxpayers, as voters, is to really push these guys down. Like, look in the mirror, examine your own red tape, your own impact on the housing affordability problem.
Well, you said their solution to everything, tax the hell out of it. How about incentives for people? Instead of taxing me if I have a vacant home so I'll rent it out, how about cutting my residential tax if I rent it out?
Well, exactly. I mean, you could do the flip. There's always the reverse available to you. So Let's take Gregor Robertson at his word and say he really is concerned about the rental vacancy rate, and he wants to find a way to get more units into the market for renting. And let's say, okay, well, getting these things approved through City Hall is just too difficult, it takes too long, and, he wants to do something quicker. So instead of actually beating up on people who have a vacant home, and let's remember, these people have purchased this property, they have, hundreds of years of property rights behind them, the ability to use their home the way they see fit, especially if they're not hurting anyone else. What if they had brought in an incentive somehow? There's a lot of talk that maybe people who do rent out their homes don't pay their full income tax on that income. If that's the case, maybe there's a way that you could, work with the government to reduce the income tax rate on that money. Who knows? There's lots of different ways you could incentivize people, but instead these guys went to the opposite, which is big city bureaucracy, new department hounding people who may or may not be living in their homes, the city snitch line, so neighbor can rat out neighbor, and a big whopping tax on people who have the temerity to not use their home in the way that Mayor Robertson thinks it should be used.
Well, what about the snowbirds? People like to enjoy their retirement by going to sunnier climes in the wintertime. Would they be subject to this tax?
Well, it's still up in the air. So the mayor has claimed that this tax wouldn't apply to anyone who you'd have to be vacant for a year. Certainly, though, there's nothing in the reports that says that you have to be vacant for a year, so it's all under public consultation. And what happens if they do decide 6 months? It's not just snowbirds, right? Like, if you're an MP for Vancouver and you decide to, you got to go to Ottawa for several months a year, is your home now vacant? If someone passes away and the home is in escrow, is it considered vacant? If you're divorcing and you both kind of moved out, is that home considered vacant? If you're a university professor on sabbatical, is that vacant? If you're a Vancouver Canuck who maybe you spend just a few months here in the city and the rest of the time you're at home in Minnesota or something, or training or traveling, is that home vacant? So there's just all these different problems, and the truth is, once you start weeding out the perfectly valid reasons why homes are vacant, I think the number of actual some investors bought a property and just left it abandoned is probably very, very low. Plus,
as a homeowner, I would be very nervous about letting strangers stay in my house for any reason.
Well, exactly. So, on the flip side of this, some people use Airbnb to rent out properties for short periods of time. Now, the mayor of Vancouver is cracking down on Airbnb, forcing extensive licensing, taxes, and all sorts of other things on people who want to rent out through Airbnb, and even banning them in certain cases. Well, you can't have it both ways, right? Like, sometimes people want these short-term rentals because they're a little bit easier to handle. Certainly, there's very little evidence that any of these short-term rentals would actually generating more money now than they would as full-time rental properties. It's just a different way that people have the ability to use their property and to help make ends meet. There was a study, actually, Jim, that came out yesterday. Canadians have the highest per capita household debt of any country in the G8. And we know British Columbia, from other studies, has the highest per capita household debt of any province in Confederation. So, here in BC, we're now the worst of the worst. So much for the best place on earth. I highly doubt we're going to see any commemorative license plates celebrating our massive household debt. And now you're taking away Airbnb revenue, which is a way for some people to help make ends meet.
Now, of course, I would like to talk to Mayor Robertson about the issues here. I've been trying to get an interview with him for 4 months, but his office every day comes up with a new excuse how the mayor cannot find 15 minutes in his schedule to talk to the Goddard Report. What does that tell you about what kind of media relations they have?
Well, you might recall before the last election, Mayor Robertson almost breaking down in tears, apologizing to the people of Vancouver for not communicating enough and doing the right thing, and saying sorry for, their kind of bad government. You may recall before that, I think it was 2008, when they ran on a platform of being the most open and communicative government in Canadian history. The proof is in the pudding, right? Mayor Robertson is a coward if he's not going to come on do media and talk to the voters where they're at. There's plenty of people who, look, we're all busy. Everyone's busy, but you make time to talk to constituents. That's your job, and you should be doing that.
And his professional apologist, and I called him that because he's got over 60, want to know exactly what questions I will ask. How open is that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a bit of a diva move there. Is that Mayor Robertson's so unfamiliar with the issues facing Vancouverites that he has to be fully briefed before he can talk about, the questions. I think anyone who's listened to your show over the years can probably sketch out, the big pools of interest that you have and make an educated guess on the kind of things that you're going to ask them. But yeah, I have a real problem. This actually bridges to something else. The city of Penticton, of all things, hired a communications officer full-time, and then a few months later they hired a civic engagement officer, paying them $90,000 a year. In my view, Jim, the mayor is your civic engagement officer. It's up to the mayor to bridge the gap between City Hall and the people and to communicate what's going on and to be available. So, Gregor Robertson can hide behind his hordes of well-paid communications officers. Certainly he's got plenty there. He's got even more at TransLink as the chair of the mayor's committee there. But he should be standing up and remembering his teary, heartfelt apology to the people of Vancouver and his promises to be more open and accessible and to do business differently this term.
He's allowed to cry on my shoulder anytime, and at 6'6", he towers over everybody. He can cry on everybody's shoulder. The mayor of Burnaby, by the way, the third biggest city in British Columbia, has a direct access. He says, Jim, you have my BlackBerry number. Call me anytime. The last time I talked to him, he was in Ireland on holidays, but he still talked. Yeah,
it's a big difference. Derek Corrigan and I don't see eye to eye on a lot of policies, but you got to hand it to him. Always available, always accessible. Actually, hilarious Derek Corrigan story is back in the day. Remember when the Canadian dollar was at par or a slightly heavy U.S. dollar, and Bellingham Airport was just booming with Canadians, and Global News goes down there and interviews a couple coming out of Bellingham Airport, and they were kind of sheepishly talking about how they'd save money and all that, and then they didn't really realize it, but it was Derek and Kathy Corrigan, the mayor of Burnaby and the MLA for Burnaby Deer Lake. So one of those great things. But it does show you that, Derek's never going to shy away from letting the public know what he thinks and what's important.
Yeah, to be honest, I wish more politicians were like Derek. You may not agree with what he says, but at least he'll tell you what he believes in, and he's usually solid and has stats to back up his side of the argument.
Yeah, well, you talk about the homelessness issue, for example, right? Burnaby, one of the few big cities that doesn't have a homeless shelter, and he's been pretty adamant about why. And, you may agree or disagree with that. Lots of people disagree, but at the same time, you always appreciate where he's coming from. He's upfront with the public and explains why, and the public have always had an option, right? You vote the bum out if they don't like the way he's done business, but at the very least, they can't argue that he hasn't been upfront with his views on things.
He's no interview dodger.
No, he's not. And the great thing about Derek too, he's a colorful guy, so there's always he's always good for a quote, and he's not afraid to buck the regional trend and talk about issues in a different light.
Well, I remember when he was the chair of TransLink back in the 90s, and he said the most desperate needed rapid transit line wasn't to the airport. It wasn't another line in Burnaby. It was to get a line out to UBC because the Broadway corridor is the busiest transit corridor in Canada. They've yet to build it, and he was right.
Yeah, great point. I mean, during the plebiscite, he was one of the few mayors who said no to the sales tax. He and I had different reasons, but always appreciated his insight in it. He's also the one that famously said TransLink was the beast that eats money, which was a line that I used many times thereafter. And yeah, Corrigan, I actually think he's retiring at the end of next year. I think that's been announced, if I'm recalling correctly. Look, very different guy. Don't always agree with his policies. In fact, disagree on many of them, but you've got to hand it to him. Passionate defender for Burnaby. Always fought for what was good for that community, and definitely brought a different kind of thinking to regional tables, which that's going to be sorely lacking. We need fewer Gregor Robertsons who just do what their handlers tell them to do, and more Derek Corrigans who aren't afraid to speak their mind on policy.
Well, the last time I checked, the city of Burnaby had something like a $600 million surplus. What other city in Canada can brag about that?
Yeah, I think it's closer to $1 billion now in reserves. And,
Oh, there you go.
Pretty amazing. Now, of course, he's still raising taxes every year, and you kind of wonder why that never flows back to the people who have put that money in. But look, when you talk about, say, SkyTrain, for example, Burnaby has done density correctly. I mean, look at Metrotown, towers, condos, all sorts of things around those SkyTrain stations. They've worked hard to bring density there. Brentwood is another great example of redeveloping that mall. I wish some of these other communities did the same, and I hope that the Evergreen Line communities, as that SkyTrain extension extends, do that same kind of density, because that's a good spot to put it.
We'll have more with Jordan Bateman right after the break.
Gem International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond producing country in Africa, located next to the fourth largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109 carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. Gem International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
In Goddard we trust.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Jordan Bateman. Jordan, we were saying politicians love to tax things. That's their solution. What's the opposite way to do things that you think could bring about social change or redevelopment in a positive way that doesn't cost you an arm and a leg?
Well, there's incentivizing people, incentivizing builders, but there's also offsetting. So let's talk about TransLink, for example. The mayors now are coming out with a TransLink development cost charge. Essentially, they'll charge a per unit fee on every condo and home built in the Lower Mainland, and that money will flow to TransLink. Now, that will add cost to those apartments being built, to those condos being built, to those townhouses, and to those homes. So instead of actually going through their own, red tape and bureaucracies and try to find ways to lighten the burden and kind of offset it, they're just going to simply add that cost and move on. That to me is very lazy leadership. They should be hunting through and figure out ways to speed up permitting processes, find ways to save those same people money so that at the very least it offsets. To me, that makes more sense. You still get the value that you want, which is money for transit. But at the same time, you're not adding more burden to new first-time home buyers who are already probably taking out massive mortgages and really struggling to get into the market. So, we've seen 4 decades, really, honestly, it was 1987 when we first saw these kind of, saw taxes trying to be used to influence the housing market when Bill Vander Zalm brought in the property transfer tax, a tax on the top 5% of homes to try to curb foreign investment. You actually read the newspaper accounts of the time, read his books written long before the current real estate boom. You'll see that one of the main reasons they brought in that tax was to stop offshore investors from, raising the cost of housing in the Lower Mainland. That luxury tax, though, quickly became an everyone tax, and now property transfer tax is just one of 107 different taxes on new houses that end up driving up the price. So, for 40 years we've tried this, weird policy of raising and inventing new taxes, fees, charges, and red tape in order to get the kind of housing we want, and all we've done is make housing more expensive.
Do you think there's any hope for the average person to see a cut or a reduction in these taxes and regulations?
You're going to need new leadership, I think, in a lot of these city halls, and you're going to need realistic leadership, and you need voters holding guys to account. We can't let them pivot off of their own role in this and blame, shadowy Chinese capitalists and, income tax dodgers. And I'm not saying for a second that those things don't need to be addressed. They absolutely should be investigated, researched, and addressed. But at the same time, we need to push our politicians to look at their own processes. I've often wondered what would happen, right, if you forced every single city councilor and mayor to essentially pick one application, an elected term, that they're not allowed to vote on. Instead, they have to go and actually work with the developer to get it through City Hall. I bet you'd see a whole whack of changes to the processes and the fee structures, because people would suddenly realize just how insane it is, the kind of paperwork and red tape that you have to go through just to do something positive, which is build a house. Housing should not be treated like tobacco. People are trying to tax tobacco to the point where people quit smoking. we should not be trying to tax housing to the point where people quit trying to build houses. I mean, we need more supply, not less, so we've got to find a way to make it easier.
Jordan, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
My guest has been Jordan Bateman, BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, their website, taxpayer.com. You're listening to the Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Questions for the show can be emailed to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.